Tommy Wilson stared at the pig in his backyard, his stomach growling from hunger. At 12 years old, he hadn't imagined this would be all he had left after his grandfather's death. The small house they'd lived in was gone, sold to pay medical bills, and now he and his mother Sarah were barely getting by in a tiny rental on the edge of town. "Are you sure this is all Grandpa left?" Tommy asked his mother again, watching the pig root around in the dirt. Sarah wiped her hands on her waitress uniform, getting ready for another double shift at the local diner. "Yes, honey. The lawyer said your grandfather was very specific. He wanted you to have his prized pig, Wilbur." Tommy didn't understand. His grandfather had been a successful farmer, but in his final years, he'd sold everything except this one pig. Everyone in town talked about how strange old Joe Wilson had become, keeping just one animal when he used to have hundreds. Richard Sterling, the richest man in their small town of Millbrook, drove past their yard in his shiny black Mercedes. He stopped when he saw Tommy and the pig, rolling down his window with a smirk on his face. "Well, well, so this is what old Joe left his grandson, a worthless pig." Richard's laugh was cruel. "You know, boy, I offered your grandfather millions for his farm years ago, but the old fool refused to sell. Look where all his pride got him. And you." Tommy felt his face grow hot with anger, but his mother had taught him to be polite. "Wilbur's not worthless, Mr. Sterling. Grandpa said he was special." "Special? Ha! That old man lost his mind at the end. Tell you what, I'll give you $50 for that pig right now. It's more than you'll ever get from it." Tommy looked at Wilbur, who had stopped rooting and was staring at him with surprisingly intelligent eyes. "No thank you, sir. Grandpa wanted me to have him." Richard's face darkened. "Suit yourself, boy. But you'll learn soon enough that sentiments don't put food on the table. Speaking of which," he glanced at Sarah in her waitress uniform. "I hear you're working at Betty's diner now, Sarah. My, how the mighty have fallen. Joe's daughter serving pancakes to make ends meet." Sarah stood straighter. "Honest work is nothing to be ashamed of, Mr. Sterling." "Of course not," Richard said with fake sympathy. "But you know I'm always looking for personal assistance at my estate. The pay would be much better than waiting tables." "No thank you," Sarah said firmly. "I need to get to work now." After Richard drove away, Sarah hugged Tommy tight. "Don't listen to him, honey. Your grandfather was the wisest man I knew. If he left you, Wilbur, he had a good reason." Tommy nodded, but his eyes were filled with tears. "I just wish I knew what the reason was, Mom. We can barely afford food, and now we have to feed a pig, too." "We'll figure it out," Sarah promised, though worry lined her face. "There's some leftover vegetables in the fridge that were too old for the diner to serve. You can feed those to Wilbur tonight. I'll be home late. Make sure you do your homework." After his mother left, Tommy sat down next to Wilbur in the dirt. The pig was different from others he'd seen on farms. He was clean, for one thing, and seemed to pay attention when Tommy talked. "What made you so special to Grandpa?" Tommy asked. Wilbur just grunted and went back to rooting in the ground. That evening, as Tommy was doing his math homework by lamplight, they kept the electricity use low to save money, he heard Wilbur making excited noises in the yard. When he went to check, he found the pig had dug up something shiny. It was an old tin box, the kind his grandfather used to keep important papers in. Tommy's hands shook as he opened it. Inside was a letter in his grandfather's shaky handwriting. "Dear Tommy, if you're reading this, then Wilbur has done what I trained him to do. Everyone thought I was crazy, spending years teaching a pig to hunt for truffles, but Wilbur is the best truffle-hunting pig in America. The spots where I trained him are marked on the map in this box. Take him there, and he'll find you treasures, worth more than gold. People like Richard Sterling think money is everything, but true wealth comes from patience, hard work, and believing in yourself. That's why I left you Wilbur instead of money. He'll teach you these lessons better than I ever could. Take care of him, and he'll take care of you. Love, Grandpa." Tommy stared at the map with wide eyes. He'd heard of truffles. They were mushrooms that grew underground and sold for hundreds of dollars per pound to fancy restaurants. His grandfather had left him something better than money. He'd left him a way to earn it himself. That night, Tommy could hardly sleep. His mind raced with possibilities, but he knew he'd have to be careful. If Richard Sterling found out about Wilbur's special talent, he'd try even harder to take him away. The next morning, Tommy woke up early. He had a lot to learn about truffles and how to sell them, but for the first time since his grandfather died, he felt hope. He looked out the window at Wilbur, who was already awake and waiting for him. "Ready to get to work, buddy?" Tommy asked. Wilbur oinked in response, and Tommy could have sworn the pig was smiling. He didn't know it yet, but this was the beginning of a journey that would change not just his life, but the whole town of Millbrook. Richard Sterling's laughter would soon turn to disbelief, and everyone who had pitied the boy with nothing but a pig would learn that sometimes the most precious gifts come in unexpected packages. Sarah came home exhausted from her double shift, to find Tommy surrounded by library books about truffles, mushrooms, and pig training. Her son's eyes were bright with excitement as he explained his grandfather's letter and Wilbur's special talent. "Mum, we're going to be okay. Grandpa didn't leave us with nothing. He left us with everything we need." Sarah wanted to believe, but years of hardship had taught her to be cautious. "Honey, your grandfather was an amazing man, but are you sure about this? Truffle hunting sounds like something from a fancy European restaurant, not Millbrook." "That's exactly why it's perfect." Tommy showed her an article about truffle prices. "Look, Mom, restaurants pay thousands of dollars for good truffles, and Grandpa's map shows spots all through the forest behind Sterling Estate. That's why Mr. Sterling wanted our land so badly." Sarah's face went pale. "Tommy, you can't go near Sterling Estate. Richard Sterling is a dangerous man when he doesn't get his way." "But Mom, the public forest behind his property doesn't belong to him. I checked at the library. Anyone can go truffle hunting there." Before Sarah could argue more, there was a knock at their door. It was Betty, Sarah's boss from the diner. "Sarah, I'm sorry, but Richard Sterling just bought the diner. He's making changes and—" Betty wrung her hands. "He's letting go of half the staff, including you." Sarah sank into a chair. "But why? The diner was doing fine." "He says he's turning it into an upscale restaurant." "Sarah, I think he's doing this because you turned down his job offer." Tommy watched his mother trying not to cry and felt anger build in his chest. First, Mr. Sterling had mocked his inheritance, and now he was hurting his mom. Well, Tommy wasn't going to let him win. That night, after his mother fell into an exhausted sleep, Tommy snuck out with Wilbur and his grandfather's map. The moon was bright enough to light their way through the forest. Tommy's heart pounded every time a twig snapped, but Wilbur moved confidently as if he remembered these paths. Suddenly, Wilbur stopped and began rooting excitedly at the base of an old oak tree. Tommy dug where the pig indicated, and there it was, his first truffle. It looked like a lumpy potato, but Tommy knew it was worth more than gold. By morning, Wilbur had found 6 more truffles. Tommy carefully wrapped them like his grandfather's letter had instructed and took them to Chef Marcus at the fancy Mountain View Resort, 30 miles away, where Sterling had no influence. Chef Marcus's eyes went wide when he saw the truffles. "These are local, fresh." He examined them carefully. "Magnificent. Who's your supplier?" Tommy stood tall. "I am. My grandfather trained the best truffle hunting pig in America." The chef laughed, but not unkindly. "Well, young man, your grandfather trained him well. These are better than the Italian ones I've been importing. I'll take them all." Tommy left the resort with $800 in his pocket. He'd never seen so much money in his life, but more importantly, he had a regular customer. Chef Marcus wanted all the truffles Tommy could bring him. When he got home, his mother was frantic. "Where were you? I've been worried sick." Tommy showed her the money. "Mom, this is just the beginning. We don't need Mr. Sterling or his diner. We can make it on our own." Sarah stared at the money, then at her son's determined face. He looked so much like his grandfather in that moment. The same quiet strength, the same refusal to be beaten down. "Tommy, She pulled him close. "Your grandfather would be so proud of you. But please be careful. Success makes men like Richard Sterling dangerous." She was right to be worried, because at that very moment Richard Sterling was meeting with his security chief in his mansion overlooking the town. "Someone's been in the forest behind my property," Sterling said, studying surveillance photos. "And they're finding something valuable. I want to know what it is." The security chief nodded. "We'll catch them, sir. No one steals from you." "No," Sterling smiled coldly. "No one does." Back at their small rental house, Tommy was making plans. The truffle money would help with bills, but he had bigger dreams. His grandfather's map showed dozens of truffle-growing spots throughout the forest. With Wilbur's help, they could start a real business. That evening, as Tommy brushed Wilbur before bed, the pig insisted on being clean, he noticed something odd about the pig's collar. There was a small USB drive hidden inside it. Another message from his grandfather. Tommy rushed to his laptop. The drive contained videos of his grandfather teaching Wilbur to hunt truffles, but there was something else too, documents showing that Richard Sterling's empire wasn't as legitimate as everyone thought. Tommy didn't understand all the legal terms, but he recognized the words fraud and illegal land acquisition. "Oh, Grandpa," Tommy whispered, "you didn't just leave me a pig, did you? You left me a way to make things right." Wilbur grunted softly, and Tommy scratched behind his ears. "Don't worry, buddy, we'll be smart about this. Mr. Sterling isn't the only one who can play a long game." As night fell over Millbrook, two very different plans were being set in motion. In his mansion, Richard Sterling plotted to find and crush whoever was trespassing in his forest. And in a humble rental house, a boy and his pig were building the foundation of something that would shake Sterling's empire to its core. Neither of them knew it yet, but Millbrook was about to learn an important lesson about the true meaning of inheritance and the power of underestimating those who seem weak. The pig that Sterling had laughed at would soon wipe the smile right off his face. Word spread quickly through Millbrook about the changes at Betty's Diner. Richard Sterling had renamed it Sterling's Fine Dining, replacing the comfortable booths with modern furniture and the affordable menu with overpriced dishes nobody in town could afford. Sarah struggled to find another job. It seemed like every business in town had gotten a friendly visit from Sterling's associates, warning them about hiring Joe Wilson's daughter, but Sarah Wilson wasn't one to give up easily. "I've got an interview at the Mountain View Resort," she told Tommy one morning. "It's a long commute, but at least it's outside Sterling's influence." Tommy hesitated, then pulled out the stack of money he'd earned from his latest truffle sale. "Mom, you don't have to work so hard anymore. Look." Sarah's eyes widened at the growing pile of cash. In just 3 weeks, Tommy and Wilbur had earned more than she made in 2 months at the diner. "Tommy, this is wonderful, but..." She looked worried. "Where are you getting all this money?" When Tommy explained about Chef Marcus and the resort, Sarah sat down heavily. "You've been sneaking into the forest at night? Do you know how dangerous that is?" "I'm careful, Mom, and Wilbur protects me. He can smell people coming from far away." Before Sarah could respond, they heard a commotion outside. Richard Sterling's security team was going door to door passing out notices. "By order of Sterling Enterprises," the notice read, "the forest area behind Sterling Estate is now private property. Trespassing will result in arrest and prosecution." Tommy's heart sank. "He can't do that. It's public land." "He can't," said a new voice. "But he's hoping nobody will challenge him." They turned to see Linda Martinez, a lawyer who had recently moved to town. She was one of the few people still eating at the food truck Sarah had started to make ends meet. "I've seen men like Sterling before," Linda said, studying the notice. "They count on people being too afraid or too poor to fight back. But this land grab is illegal and I can prove it." Hope flickered in Sarah's eyes. "You'd help us?" "Your food truck tamales remind me of my grandmother's," Linda smiled. "Besides, I've been looking for a way to take Sterling down a peg, but we'll need evidence of his illegal activities." Tommy thought about the USB drive hidden in Wilbur's collar. "What if we had documents, proof of fraud and illegal land deals?" Linda's eyes sharpened. "That would be exactly what we need." "But Tommy, if you have something like that, you need to be very careful. Men like Sterling don't play fair when cornered." As if to prove her point, a black SUV pulled up in front of their house. Bradley Cooper, Sterling's security chief, stepped out. "Mrs. Wilson," he said with fake politeness, "Mr. Sterling would like to discuss a business opportunity with your son." Sarah stepped in front of Tommy. "My son is 12. He doesn't have business meetings." Mr. Sterling noticed the boy has been earning quite a bit of money lately. He's concerned about unauthorized business activities in his town. "Since when does Richard Sterling control who can work in Millbrook?" Linda stepped forward, her lawyer's badge visible on her belt. Bradley's smile faltered. And you are? Someone who's very interested in Mr. Sterling's recent land claims. Perhaps we should discuss them in court. The security chief retreated, but they could feel his eyes watching them as he drove away. That night, Tommy couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about the USB drive and his grandfather's legacy. The old man hadn't just taught Wilbur to find truffles, he'd been gathering evidence against Sterling all along. Tommy slipped out of bed and went to check on Wilbur. The pig was agitated, pacing his pen and sniffing the air. Suddenly, Wilbur let out a loud squeal. Tommy spun around to see two dark figures approaching from the shadows, but before they could reach him, Wilbur burst through his pen and charged at the intruders, sending them scrambling back over the fence. The commotion woke Sarah and Linda, who had been sleeping on their couch while reviewing legal documents. They ran outside to find Tommy shaking but unhurt. "That's it," Linda said grimly. "We're filing for an emergency injunction first thing tomorrow. Sterling's not getting away with intimidating a child." Sarah hugged Tommy tight. "Maybe we should leave town, start fresh somewhere else." "No, Mom." Tommy watched as Wilbur calmly returned to his pen, standing guard like a sentinel. "Grandpa didn't raise us to run away. He gave me Wilbur so we could fight back." Linda nodded approvingly. "Your boy's right, Sarah. Sometimes you have to stand your ground." As they went back inside, Tommy paused to give Wilbur an extra treat. The pig hadn't just protected him. He'd shown everyone that even the smallest and most underestimated could be stronger than they appeared. In his mansion, Richard Sterling received the night's report with growing rage. "You're telling me you were scared off by a pig? A pig and a boy?" Bradley Cooper shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, there's something strange about that animal, and now they've got a lawyer involved. I don't care if they've got the Supreme Court involved. I want that boy's operation shut down, and I want to know what he's finding in my forest." But for the first time in years, Sterling's orders weren't being followed without question. Because word was spreading through Millbrook about the boy who stood up to the town's biggest bully, armed with nothing but determination and a very special pig. The battle lines were drawn, and the next move would change everything. Not just for Tommy and his family, but for everyone who had ever felt powerless against the Richard Sterlings of the world. The Mountain View Resort's kitchen was buzzing with excitement. Chef Marcus had just received another delivery of Tommy's truffles, and food critics were raving about his new locally sourced menu. "These truffles are making us famous," Chef Marcus told Tommy, counting out payment. "But my boss wants to meet our supplier. He's offering an exclusive contract." Tommy hesitated. "I need to think about it." On his way home, Tommy noticed a fancy car following him. He took a different route, just like Linda had taught him. The car kept following until Wilbur, who was walking beside Tommy, suddenly stopped and let out 3 sharp squeals. The car swerved and sped away. Tommy later learned that Wilbur's squeals had attracted a police patrol car. His pig wasn't just smart, he was strategic. At home, Tommy found his mother and Linda surrounded by papers. Linda looked up with excitement. "We've got him, Tommy. Your grandfather's documents prove Sterling's been forging land deeds for years. He never actually owned most of the property he claims." Sarah looked worried. "But will it be enough? Sterling has expensive lawyers." "He does," Linda agreed. "But he doesn't have the truth, or a brilliant truffle-hunting pig." Their conversation was interrupted by the evening news. The reporter was standing in front of Sterling's mansion. Breaking news from Millbrook. Business tycoon Richard Sterling announced plans to clear the historic forest behind his estate for a new luxury development. Environmental groups are protesting, but Sterling claims full ownership rights. Tommy jumped up. "He can't cut down the forest, all the truffles will die." "That's his plan," Linda said grimly. "He knows someone's making money from that forest. If he can't have it, he'll destroy it." The next day, construction equipment began arriving at the forest's edge. Sterling had moved fast, not even waiting for proper permits, but he hadn't counted on Wilbur. As the bulldozers approached the forest line, Wilbur broke through his pen again. Tommy ran after him, but his pig was on a mission. Wilbur charged straight through the construction site, causing workers to scatter. News cameras caught everything. The sight of a small pig standing defiantly in front of a bulldozer caught the public's imagination. Social media exploded with Wilbur, the hero. Sterling was furious. "Get that pig out of there. Start clearing the land." But the workers refused to move. Nobody wanted to be seen hurting Millbrook's new favorite hero. Then Tommy stepped forward, tears in his eyes. "This forest belonged to my grandfather. Mr. Sterling stole it, just like he steals everything." The news cameras swung toward him. Linda quickly stepped up beside him, holding the evidence files. "We have proof," she announced. "Richard Sterling has been forging documents and bribing officials for years. This forest is public land." Sterling's face turned purple. "You can't prove anything. That pig and this brat have been trespassing, stealing from my land." "Actually," Chef Marcus stepped out from the crowd that had gathered, "young Tommy here has been legally supplying my restaurant with truffles, the finest I've ever cooked with. He has all the proper permits and licenses." Tommy stared in surprise. He hadn't known Chef Marcus was there. "This boy and his pig," the chef continued, "have created more honest wealth from this forest in a few months than Sterling has in years of stealing land." The crowd murmured in agreement. More people were arriving, including many who had lost businesses or homes to Sterling's schemes. Sterling tried to retreat to his car, but found his path blocked by Sarah and other former diner employees. "Running away, Mr. Sterling?" Sarah asked. "Like you ran away when my father refused to sell you his land, honestly?" Police cars pulled up, led by Detective Johnson, who had been quietly building a case against Sterling for months. "Richard Sterling," the detective announced, "you're under arrest for fraud, forgery, and conspiracy." As Sterling was led away, in handcuffs, he pointed at Tommy. "This isn't over. No stupid pig can bring down my empire." But he was wrong. By sunset, Sterling's illegal land grabs were making national news. The forest was saved, and the truth about his crimes was finally coming out. Back home, Tommy sat with Wilbur in their yard, sharing an apple. "You know what, Wilbur? Grandpa was right. The best gifts aren't the ones that make you rich. They're the ones that make you brave." Wilbur oinked in agreement, and even Linda had to laugh. "Your grandfather would be proud, Tommy. You didn't just save his forest. You showed everyone that sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest." "Heroes." Sarah brought out a pie to celebrate. As they sat together under the stars, Tommy realized something important. His grandfather hadn't just left him a pig. He'd left him a purpose. And in Millbrook, that was worth more than all of Sterling's stolen gold. Sterling's arrest changed everything in Millbrook. While he awaited trial, investigators uncovered decades of corruption. Properties were returned to their rightful owners. Betty got her diner back. The forest was officially protected as public land. But success brought new challenges for Tommy and his family. "Look at this," Linda said one morning, showing them a stack of business cards. They were from reporters, TV producers, and even Hollywood. Agents. Everyone wanted the story of the boy and his truffle hunting pig. "Good Morning America wants to interview you," Sarah told Tommy, "and there's a children's book publisher interested in Wilbur's story." Tommy felt overwhelmed. "I just want to keep working with Wilbur. We don't need all this attention," but attention came anyway. Tourist buses started arriving in Millbrook. People wanted pictures with Wilbur. Some even tried sneaking into the forest with their own pigs, hoping to find truffles. Then Victoria Sterling arrived in town. Richard's daughter was nothing like her father. She'd spent years working for environmental causes, fighting against men like him. "I want to make things right," she told Tommy's family over dinner at their house. "Father hurt so many people. Maybe we can use the Sterling fortune to help them instead." Victoria had a plan. She wanted to turn the forest into an educational center, teaching sustainable farming and truffle cultivation. She offered Tommy a position as lead instructor. "You and Wilbur could teach others what your grandfather taught you," she explained. "Help people build honest businesses just like you did." The idea excited Tommy, but something felt wrong. That night he found Wilbur acting strangely, refusing to eat. "What's wrong, buddy?" Tommy sat with his pig, worried. Wilbur had never been sick before. A quick visit from the vet confirmed Tommy's fears. Wilbur was aging. The stress of recent events had taken a toll. "He's still healthy," the vet assured them, "but he needs rest. No more truffle hunting for a while." Tommy was heartbroken. Wilbur wasn't just a truffle hunter, he was family. The thought of him being sick scared Tommy more than anything Sterling had done. Sarah found Tommy crying in Wilbur's pen. "He'll be okay, honey. He just needs care like your grandfather did at the end." "But what about Victoria's offer, the teaching center? We can't do it without Wilbur." "Maybe that's not what Wilbur needs right now," Sarah said softly. "Your grandfather didn't give him to you just for truffle hunting. He gave him to you because he knew you'd love him." Tommy spent the next weeks caring for Wilbur. He read to him like his grandfather used to do. He made sure the pig got gentle exercise. Slowly, Wilbur's energy returned, but something had changed in Tommy too. Watching Wilbur recover helped him understand what was really important. "We can still do the teaching center," he told Victoria, "but differently. Instead of just truffle hunting, we'll teach people about caring for animals, about patience and kindness. That's what Grandpa and Wilbur really taught me." Victoria loved the new idea. Construction began on the Wilson Sterling Education Center, built on the edge of the forest. They created special paths where Wilbur could walk safely, teaching young visitors about the connection between animals and nature. One afternoon, as Tommy watched Wilbur greeting a group of children, Linda joined him. "Your grandfather would love this," she said. He knew the real treasure wasn't in the truffles. It was in teaching the next generation to care. Sarah's food truck became a permanent fixture at the center, serving her famous tamales to visitors. Betty's diner reopened, better than ever. And every evening, Tommy still sat with Wilbur, sharing an apple and watching the sunset over their forest. Richard Sterling's empire had been built on greed and lies, but from its ruins, Tommy and Wilbur had helped build something stronger, a community where people looked out for each other, where wisdom was passed down, and where even the smallest acts of kindness could change lives. One night, Tommy found another message from his grandfather, hidden in an old photo album. "Remember, Tommy, true wealth isn't in what you have. It's in what you share. Take care of Wilbur, and he'll show you how to take care of others too." Looking at Wilbur, dozing peacefully in his pen, Tommy smiled. His grandfather had been right all along. Some inheritances couldn't be measured in money. They could only be measured in love, in lessons learned and in lives changed for the better. News of Richard Sterling's trial brought reporters flooding back to Millbrook. The education center had to hire security to keep them from disturbing the animals, especially Wilbur, who was now a local celebrity. Tommy didn't like all the attention, but something else worried him more. Bradley Cooper, Sterling's former security chief, had been spotted around town. He'd made a deal with prosecutors to testify against his boss, but Tommy didn't trust him. "He's been watching the center," Tommy told Linda. "I saw him taking pictures." Linda frowned. "I'll look into it. Meanwhile, stay close to home." But home wasn't as safe as they thought. One morning, Tommy found Wilbur's pen empty. The gate was still locked, with no signs of forced entry. Only someone who knew Wilbur's habits could have lured him out. The whole town mobilized to search. Victoria Sterling offered a reward. Chef Marcus closed his restaurant so his staff could help look. Even Betty shut down the diner to join the search parties. Sarah held Tommy as he cried, "Who would take him? And why now?" The answer came in a phone call to the education center. Bradley Cooper's voice was smug. "Want your pig back? Tell Victoria." Sterling to drop her plans for testifying against her father. "She's got until midnight to withdraw as a witness, or the pig disappears forever." Tommy was furious. "He's trying to protect Mr. Sterling." Victoria paced the center's office. "Father must have arranged this from jail. He knows my testimony about his illegal dealings would seal his conviction." "We can't let Sterling win," Linda said. "Not after everything." But Tommy wasn't listening. He was studying his grandfather's old map of the forest. "Wait, I think I know where Wilbur is." He pointed to a spot marked with a strange symbol. "Grandpa used to say this was Wilbur's favorite training spot. If someone took him, he'd try to go there." Sarah protested when Tommy wanted to go looking, but he wouldn't be stopped. "Wilbur always comes when I call, but he has to be able to hear me." As night fell, Tommy led a small group into the forest. Victoria insisted on coming, and Linda brought 2 trusted police officers. They had to move quietly. Bradley might be watching. Tommy carried Wilbur's favorite treats and a special whistle his grandfather had used during training. When they reached the marked spot, he blew the whistle softly. For a moment, only cricket sounds answered. Then they heard it, a familiar grunt, followed by the sound of hooves on fallen leaves. Wilbur burst into the clearing, running straight to Tommy. Behind him they heard cursing and crashing sounds as Bradley Cooper stumbled through the underbrush. "Stop right there!" The police officers emerged from hiding, guns drawn. Bradley tried to run, but tripped over a root. As they handcuffed him, a phone fell from his pocket with Richard Sterling's jail phone number on the screen. Victoria looked at the evidence with tears in her eyes. "My father tried to silence me by hurting an innocent animal. That's the last straw." The next day, she testified for hours about her father's crimes. Richard Sterling was sentenced to 20 years in prison. Bradley Cooper got 10 years for the kidnapping attempt, but the real hero was Wilbur. During his captivity, he'd managed to chew through the rope Bradley used to tie him, then led him on a wild chase through the forest, straight to where he knew Tommy would look for him. "Your grandfather trained him well," Linda told Tommy. "Not just to find truffles, but to be brave and smart." The education center added a new program after that, teaching about the intelligence and loyalty of animals. Wilbur became a regular lecturer, showing visitors how pigs could solve problems and show devotion. Tommy hung his grandfather's map in the center's main hall. Beside it, he placed a new photo, Wilbur surrounded by laughing children, teaching them that sometimes the greatest wisdom comes from the most unexpected teachers. Sarah started baking special treats for Wilbur, calling them hero snacks. They became the education center's best-selling souvenir. One evening, as Tommy and Wilbur watched the sunset from their favorite spot, Victoria joined them. "You know," she said, "when I first came to make amends for my father, I thought I was the one who would be teaching lessons. Instead, a boy and his pig taught me about courage, loyalty, and doing what's right no matter the cost." Tommy hugged Wilbur tight. "Grandpa always said Wilbur was special. I don't think even he knew just how special." The forest was quiet except for the evening birds and Wilbur's contented grunts. Another crisis had passed, but Tommy knew there would always be people like Sterling in the world. The important thing was to face them with courage, surrounded by those you love and trust. And in Millbrook, that circle of trust now included one very remarkable pig. The education center was thriving. People came from all over the country to learn about sustainable farming and animal care. But Tommy noticed Wilbur getting slower, taking longer naps, eating less. The vet confirmed what Tommy feared. "He's getting old, Tommy. Pigs his age usually don't live much longer." Tommy spent every free moment with Wilbur, reading to him and sharing quiet moments in the forest. One day he found an old woman waiting at Wilbur's pen. "I'm Margaret Davis," she said. "Your grandfather and I were friends before Richard Sterling drove me out of town." Tommy remembered her name from his grandfather's papers. She'd owned a farm next to theirs before Sterling seized it through fake debts. "I've been following your story," Margaret said, watching Wilbur doze in the sunshine. "Joe would be proud, but there's something you need to know." She opened her purse and pulled out a worn notebook. "Your grandfather and I worked together, breeding special pigs for truffle hunting. Wilbur wasn't just trained, he was bred for intelligence, and before Sterling forced me to leave, we had a successful breeding program." Tommy's heart raced. "You mean?" Margaret smiled. "Wilbur has children and grandchildren. I've kept the bloodline going on my farm up north." She showed Tommy photos of pigs that looked just like Wilbur. "They've got his gift, his intelligence. Your grandfather made me promise to keep them safe until the time was right." Victoria, who had been listening nearby, stepped forward. "Mrs. Davis, would you consider bringing your program back to Millbrook? We have space at the education center." "That's why I'm here," Margaret said. "Wilbur's getting old, but his legacy doesn't have to end." The next few weeks were busy. Margaret moved back to Millbrook, bringing 3 young pigs from Wilbur's bloodline. Tommy was amazed at how much they looked like Wilbur when he was younger. Wilbur seemed to know they were family. He perked up around the younger pigs, showing them his favorite spots in the forest. They learned quickly, proving they had inherited his special talents. But one morning, Tommy found Wilbur lying very still in his pen. The pig who had changed so many lives had peacefully passed away in his sleep. The whole town mourned. The education center closed for a day of remembrance. Chef Day. Marcus created a special truffle dish in Wilbur's honor. Even the national news covered the story of the pig who had helped bring down an empire of corruption. Sarah held Tommy as he cried. "He had a wonderful life, honey, and he changed so many lives for the better." Victoria organized a memorial garden at the education center. They buried Wilbur there under his favorite apple tree. The plaque read, "Here rests Wilbur, teacher, hero, friend. He showed us that the greatest gifts come from the heart." A week later, Tommy was sitting in the garden when he heard excited squeals. The young pigs had found their first truffle, working together just like Wilbur used to do. Margaret watched them with tears in her eyes. "Your grandfather used to say that love and wisdom never really die. They just get passed down in different ways." The education center expanded its programs. Margaret's breeding program flourished, producing more intelligent truffle-hunting pigs. Each one had a bit of Wilbur's spirit, his cleverness, his gentleness, his ability to bring out the best in people. Tommy started teaching the new generation of students with the young pigs. "My grandfather gave me more than just a pig," he would tell them. "He gave me a chance to learn what really matters: kindness, patience, and standing up for what's right." Sarah's food truck became a restaurant at the center, named Wilbur's Place. The walls were covered with photos of the remarkable pig who had started it all. Linda helped set up a scholarship fund in Wilbur's name, helping children from struggling families learn about sustainable farming and animal care. One evening, Tommy sat in the memorial garden, sharing an apple with the young pigs. He could almost feel Wilbur's presence in their gentle eyes and playful spirits. "You're still teaching us, aren't you?" he whispered to the plaque. "Through them, through everything. You helped create." The young pigs gathered around him just as Wilbur used to do. In their company, Tommy realized that sometimes the greatest inheritance isn't what we receive, but what we pass on to others. The education center's success brought unexpected challenges. Big agriculture companies started offering Margaret huge sums for her breeding program. They wanted to create industrial-scale truffle operations. "Absolutely not," Margaret told them. "These pigs aren't machines. They're Wilbur's legacy." But the corporations wouldn't take no for an answer. Strange men in suits started following Margaret. One night someone broke into her breeding records at the center. Tommy found Margaret in tears. "They're trying to steal our work, just like Sterling did to your grandfather." Victoria called an emergency meeting. "We need to protect the program. These companies could tie us up in court for years." Linda had an idea. "What if we made it impossible for them to steal? We could turn the breeding program into a public trust, owned by the community." Sarah spoke up. "The whole town benefited from Wilbur. Maybe the whole town should help protect his legacy." They called a town meeting at Betty's Diner. The place was packed as Tommy stood to speak. "When my grandfather gave me Wilbur, I thought he was just giving me a pig. But he was giving all of us something bigger, a chance to build something good together." The town voted unanimously to create the Wilbur Trust. Everyone contributed what they could. Chef Marcus pledged a percentage of his restaurant's truffle sales. Betty offered her diner as collateral for the legal fees. The corporations tried to fight it, but they hadn't counted on the town's unity. Or on one final surprise from Tommy's grandfather. Going through old papers, Linda found a patent application. Joe Wilson and Margaret had registered their breeding program methodology years ago. The corporations couldn't copy it without permission. "Your grandfather thought of everything," Linda told Tommy. "He knew someday someone would try to exploit his work." The education center grew stronger. Margaret trained local young people to continue the breeding program. The pig's intelligence helped develop new sustainable farming methods. One day, a familiar face appeared at the center, Richard Sterling's ex-wife, Eleanor. She'd left him years ago, disgusted by his greed. "I should have spoken up sooner," she told Tommy. "But Richard was always so powerful, until a boy and his pig showed us all how to be brave." Eleanor joined the center's board, using her business experience to help protect it. She and Victoria worked together, healing old wounds and building new bridges. The young pigs continued to amaze everyone. They didn't just hunt truffles. They showed remarkable empathy, helping children overcome fears and teaching patience to troubled teens. Tommy started a special program for kids from broken homes. Sometimes, he'd tell them, the family you choose is as important as the family you're born with. Sarah's restaurant became a gathering place where people shared not just meals, but stories and dreams. The walls now held photos of all the lives, touched by Wilbur's legacy. Margaret's breeding program thrived, but she was selective about placing the pigs. They went only to people who understood they were receiving not just animals, but teachers. One evening, Tommy found a young girl crying in Wilbur's memorial garden. Her family had lost their farm to one of the corporations. "You know what Wilbur taught me?" Tommy sat beside her. "That sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest act of kindness." He introduced her to the young pigs, watching as their gentle presence helped heal her hurt, just like Wilbur had done for him. The corporations eventually gave up trying to take over the program. They couldn't fight the power of a community united by love and purpose. In Wilbur's garden, new flowers bloomed each spring. The plaque had been expanded to include Margaret's words, "Some inheritances can't be bought or sold. They can only be passed on through open hearts and gentle spirits." Tommy often sat there with the young pigs, sharing apples and watching the sunset. He understood now that his grandfather's greatest gift hadn't been a pig at all. It had been a lesson about how love, passed down and shared, could change the world. Richard Sterling's release date from prison was approaching. The news stirred up old fears in Millbrook, even though he'd be banned from returning to town. Tommy, now 15, worried about what Sterling might do for revenge. But he had more immediate concerns. The education center needed funding for expansion, and traditional banks were hesitant to loan money to a community trust. Then Chester Wong, a famous documentary filmmaker, arrived in Millbrook. He wanted to tell Wilbur's story, how one pig had inspired a town to stand up against corruption and create something beautiful. "It's not just about Wilbur," Chester told Tommy after spending a week filming. "It's about how a community can heal itself. Your story could inspire other towns facing similar battles." The documentary caught the attention of Janet Freeman, who ran the largest environmental foundation on the West Coast. She visited the center incognito, posing as a tourist. "I've seen a lot of community projects," she revealed later to Tommy and Victoria, "but nothing like this. You're not just preserving land, you're preserving hope." Janet offered a $10 million grant, enough to secure the center's future. But there was a catch. They'd need to expand nationwide, teaching other communities to create similar programs. Tommy wasn't sure. "Can we grow without losing what makes this place special?" Margaret had the answer. "We'll do it the way Wilbur taught us, one small act of kindness at a time." They started small, sending trained pigs and teachers to 3 nearby towns. Each community adapted the program to their needs, but Wilbur's core lessons remained. The documentary premiered at Betty's Diner. The whole town gathered to watch their story on the big screen. There wasn't a dry eye when they showed Wilbur's final days, but the most powerful moment came during interviews with children who'd been helped by the program. One boy, who hadn't spoken since his parents' divorce, described how working with the pigs had helped him find his voice again. Sarah watched Tommy during the screening. Her son had grown into a thoughtful young man, still carrying Wilbur's gentle spirit in his heart. After the film, Chester announced it had been accepted into major film festivals. "People need to see that there's still good in the world," he said. "That ordinary people and one extraordinary pig can change things." The next morning, Tommy got an unexpected call. Richard Sterling, speaking from prison, had seen the documentary on the prison television. "I spent years chasing wealth," Sterling said, his voice different than Tommy remembered. "But watching your story, seeing what you built, I understand. Now what your grandfather knew all along." Sterling revealed he had terminal cancer. His last act was signing over his remaining assets to the Wilbur Trust, with one condition: they had to be used to help communities fighting against corporate takeovers. Victoria cried when she heard her father's decision. He finally learned what real wealth means. The Education Center's new nationwide program was named Wilbur's Way, teaching communities how to combine sustainable agriculture with compassion and healing. Margaret's breeding program expanded carefully, ensuring each pig went to a community ready to carry on Wilbur's legacy. The pig's remarkable intelligence and empathy helped troubled teens, veterans with PTSD, and children with special needs. Tommy still spent every evening in Wilbur's garden, now a peaceful haven where people came to find hope and healing. The young pigs would gather around just like their ancestor used to do. Linda, who had become a state senator, used Millbrook's story to pass laws protecting community trusts and sustainable farming programs. She called it the Wilbur Effect, how one small act of kindness could ripple out to change the world. Sarah's restaurant became a training center, teaching other communities how to create gathering places that nourished both body and soul. The documentary won awards, but more importantly, it inspired other towns to stand up against corruption and corporate greed. People learned that when a community united around love and purpose, no force could defeat them. In Wilbur's garden, they added a new inscription: "Every great change begins with a single heart opening to possibility." Wilbur taught us that the smallest among us can carry the biggest dreams. Tommy looked at the young pigs playing with visiting children and smiled. His grandfather's gift kept giving, growing, healing. The inheritance of love continued to multiply, proving that some legacies were bigger than money could ever buy. 5 years had passed since Wilbur's story became a documentary. The education center had grown into a nationwide movement. Tommy, now 20, ran programs in 50 communities across the country. News reached Millbrook that Richard Sterling had died in prison. Before his death, he'd written a confession detailing all his crimes and the people he'd hurt. He asked that it be made public, giving closure to many families. Victoria organized a town meeting. Father left his fortune to make amends. Now we need to decide how to use it. The townspeople shared ideas. Betty wanted to help other small businesses resist corporate takeovers. Linda suggested expanding legal aid for communities fighting corruption. Sarah thought about food security programs for struggling families. Margaret, now in her 70s, watched it all with tears in her eyes. Joe Wilson would be so proud. His gift to Tommy started a revolution of kindness. The Wilbur Trust had become a model, studied by universities and governments. They called it compassionate commerce, how communities could prosper by putting people and animals first. Tommy still kept Wilbur's original collar in his office. The USB drive remained as proof of Sterling's crimes, but now it also held thousands of stories about lives changed by Wilbur's legacy. Chester Wong returned to Millbrook to film a follow-up documentary. He found a transformed town. Where Sterling had once ruled through fear, now cooperation and kindness guided every decision. The young girl who had lost her family farm now ran the center's youth program. The boy who hadn't spoken after his parents, divorce taught others how animals could heal emotional wounds. Janet Freeman's foundation reported that communities using Wilbur's Way showed remarkable improvements. Crime rates dropped, school performance improved. People looked out for each other. Eleanor Sterling, Richard's ex-wife, had remarried to Chef Marcus. Their wedding was held in Wilbur's garden, with the pigs as special guests. Even in formal wear, the guests took turns sharing apples with them. Tommy met Amanda Chen at a conference about sustainable farming. She ran a similar program in California. Like him, she believed in the power of compassion to change lives. "Your story inspired me," she told him. "After watching the documentary, I knew I had to help create something like this." Their wedding a year later brought people from all 50 Wilbur's Way communities to Millbrook. Each brought stories of how one pig's legacy had transformed their town. Sarah watched her son exchange vows in the garden where it all began. The pigs, descendants of Wilbur, gathered around the couple as if giving their blessing. Margaret's breeding program had grown carefully. Each pig went through special training before being placed. Communities had to prove they understood these weren't just animals, but teachers of empathy and resilience. Linda's Wilbur Effect laws spread to other states. They protected community, trusts, sustainable farming, and animal welfare programs. Corporate lobbyists couldn't fight the wave of public support. The education center's newest building housed a museum telling Millbrook's story. Children came from around the world to learn how a boy and his pig had changed so many lives. Tommy and Amanda made their home in Wilbur's garden, in a cottage overlooking the forest. Every evening they shared apples with the pigs and watched the sunset, just as Tommy had done with Wilbur years ago. "You know what I learned from Wilbur?" Tommy told the children who visited. "That love doesn't divide when you share it, it multiplies." On quiet nights, Tommy could almost hear his grandfather's voice in the rustle of leaves. He'd given his grandson more than an inheritance. He'd given him a purpose. The plaque in Wilbur's garden had one final addition. "In a world that valued wealth above all, a pig taught us to value love." His legacy lives in every act of kindness, every moment of healing, every heart open to possibility. And so the story that began with a boy and a pig continued to grow, not as a tale of riches gained or revenge taken, but as proof that the greatest power in the world was still the simple choice to be kind. In Millbrook and beyond, people learned what Tommy had discovered years ago, that sometimes the most precious inheritances weren't the ones you could hold in your hands, but the ones you held in your heart.